Welcome to the Ship.io podcast. We are doing a new format today. We wanted to start this for a while. We're going to call this thing Origin Stories, where we essentially talk to people in the industry, especially senior folks who have come a long way and kind of figure out how they got into it and the path they took and why they've made the choices they've made in their career. And hopefully that'll help some younger folks before they make those big choices themselves. We're all at home still. We're all remote. So that's the way it is in this quarantine time frame that we're in, if you're listening to this in the future. But we're recording this over Zoom, and right now we've got myself, Brandon Askov, and Matt Merrill's on the other end of the line here. Matt, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Matt. I'm a principal developer at Rocket. I've been working at Rocket for about a year now.
That's right. And principal at Rocket means super senior. So Matt is... How long have you been doing this, actually? Let's start there.
I started in some capacity in 2005. That's when I kind of began my career. I didn't start with development then. I was doing, we'll call it like the equivalent of like product management back in that time. And I did that for about a year, and then I started doing development.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been a while.
What was the company that you started at where you kind of made that shift?
I started at a big, giant insurance company. I think I'll just avoid names for now, but
sure.
So I started a big giant insurance company, and I actually started in what they called a development program for technical folks. And that's why I didn't start out with development right out of the gate. It was actually a really interesting experience where they had a program where you could go into a bunch of different technical disciplines right out of college. It was basically they purposely hired you for this. They hired people that had kind of a blend of business and technical backgrounds, which is my background. And so they started you with like product owner type work, developing requirements. At the time, it was more waterfall. And then they put you in some technical training, and then you developed a full-blown application for a year, like as a team of newbies. And then they put you out kind of into the field. It was kind of funny because I didn't think that I would like software development. I actually started as a comp sci major. I did about a year of comp sci, and I said, I don't want to program all day. Funny enough, when I actually, so I switched over to information systems as a major, and I actually even transferred schools. And funny enough, once I started programming, I found, hey, when this isn't just purely theoretical and doing little toy projects, I actually kind of like this. Like, it's not just black and white. So that's kind of how I fell into it.
I've heard that about comp sci majors before, where people don't have necessarily a concrete example of how you're going to use something. And it's funny, I wrote a blog post about this a while ago called Learning from the Middle Out, just because I was trying to ride that wave of Silicon Valley terminology. But basically the idea is like jumping into the middle and then learning your way outward from there. I think people can get bogged down in trying to learn the building blocks of something first. It would sort of be like, all right, well, we're going to learn how to make a toolbox, but first we're going to log a tree, plane it, put it into boards, and like process it. And it's like, you don't need to know all that. Just go get some lumber and build a toolbox.
That's basically where I went.
I'm not a comp sci major either, so that was my perception of that. Now, that's interesting to hear that was your relationship with the comp sci program as well. Okay, so you got into this through that insurance company. How long did you stay there before you maybe decided to jump ship?
I was there way too long.
That's a pretty typical thing. Is that your first company that you were at?
Yeah, it was my first company out of college.
Pretty loyal.
Well, I mean, quite frankly, there were a lot of good things about that job. I was there for almost 8 years.
Oh, wow.
Which is very unusual, especially now, but even still, 15 years ago, that was unusual as well. There were a lot of good things about it that kept me there, but ultimately the reason why I left is I just wasn't growing. I was stagnating in my technical career. I just wasn't being given the leeway to actually make progress. I felt quite stifled. I went to we'll call it like a semi-startup. It was like a startup backed by a larger company. And what's kind of funny about that is I really got to grow technically quite a bit. But in terms of management, that company was not managed very well. So I always like to say I learned a lot technically there. And I also learned a lot about what not to do in terms of like managing a software project. And then I worked for a not-for-profit company that did a lot of research for the government. And I worked there for almost 5 years and running software teams there. So it's kind of my crash course in my background.
Okay. I know that you definitely pride yourself as a back-end dev.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm curious, there's always these options along the way. I always say this about there's certain career opportunities that have never presented themselves to me. Like, how come I'm not a NASCAR driver? I like to drive fast. Like, how come I never got that opportunity? When it comes down to this career, you get a few chances of like, you could go back end specific, you could be front end dev, you could be DevOps, you could do a bunch of things. How did you end up choosing the path that you chose? How'd you end up going that way?
I kind of fell into it, but I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, I actually think it was kind of serendipitous. The first couple of roles that I had, I fell into back-end Java development. We were doing at the time, it was service-oriented architecture is the big thing, right? And I was developing SOAP-based web services. If anybody's listening to this that remembers those, I'm sure that a chill just went down their spine. I fell into it and I found that I really loved Java. I loved kind of the organization of it and the cleanliness of it and things like that. And I had a really excellent mentor. He was big on DevOps stuff. He was big on code quality and things like that. And he just really got me psyched about that and taught me very, very, very well. I still stay in touch with him. I owe a lot to him. What was kind of funny is from there, I did that for a few years and I would constantly get frustrated. I wasn't doing front-end development, constantly get frustrated. I wanted to be a front-end developer so bad that I couldn't get any experience. So I ended up like moving around the company and trying to get front-end experience. Nothing shook out. To make a very long story short, I took my previous job to Rocket thinking that I would do more front-end development and I started doing it. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't think I want to do this. I actually think I like what I was doing before. And then I just kind of leaned into it and I was like, yeah, I like doing back end dev. I appreciate front end dev. I think it's amazing what people can do with front end dev. It's just not my forte.
Do you feel vindicated when you hear someone like Scott O'Brien, another senior engineer that we have, basically say that the front end is now a postmodern hellscape because you're like, well, it's a good thing I saw the writing on the wall and went the other way.
No, not at all. I think it's more just a personal thing. Like I
think it's just different strokes for different folks.
I know what I like. I know what I'm good at.
Yep.
And I think like lately as I get older, like I said, I lean into it a little bit. I've committed to it. There aren't a lot of people that will like fly the flag of I'm a back-end dev and I'm proud of it, damn it. I'm not saying I do that. I think that needs to be some more of that. Like I've tried to commit to it by making my back-end discipline a lot more structured and really try to go deep into those concepts. You and I have had conversations before about how back-end dev these days is starting to blend into DevOps. So like that's an interest of mine and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of how I fell into it, so to speak, and I just embraced it.
Yeah, it's funny. I've talked about this before where I talk about the skill set in our world is like a T-shape. A lot of people have some breadth. They go kind of wide on some topics, maybe some back end, some front end, a couple different languages. You just get some broad concepts. It's good too. It's really healthy to get see it from other points of view, see other programming languages and see different paradigms. It seems like the more senior people get, they go deep in one area. And for you, that's back end dev. For me, I focus on the front end and I like JavaScript. So I guess I could say I've gone deep on JavaScript. But for the most part, I keep just learning new platforms and new things at a very general level. So I'm making my T go really wide right now.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's healthy. We'll see what happens.
Oh, no, I just think it's a different approach. I think that there's needs for generalists and there's needs for specialists. It all depends on the need of the project.
Yeah, it's a great point. Think about the people we work with. We see startups and we see established companies. And I think that when we look at startups, they value generalists because we can direct them toward, don't pick that platform. You're going to make a mistake with that.
Yeah.
Their support's terrible, or maybe their APIs don't work or whatever. Go this way instead. So we try to steer them off that path. When it's a more established company, they really need specialists. Someone like me doesn't really fit in very well at places like that because they need people who can go very deep and solve very hard problems. I'm thinking about people like Adam Frazier and Steve Abrams who are doing like that genomic stuff, and like the way they talk about it just blows my mind. They have to understand the problem space so deeply.
I consider myself a generalist too. It's kind of funny. It's almost like I'm a generalist, but I just don't do front end dev. You know what I mean? I know Java, I know JavaScript, I know a little bit of Python. Like I have a broad array of knowledge and language experience besides Java and JavaScript. I don't go that deep, but I like to be aware of those things. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got, I think it was on a panel at a conference. Somebody asked the question of like, how do you know so much? And he was like, I actually don't know so much. I just know a little bit, enough to be like, I can go ask somebody about this, or, I remember hearing about something like that. And I know enough just to be aware of it. It's not like I go, like I know enough to tell you intelligently about how to use that, but I'm aware of it. I can throw that out as an option on the table. That always resonated with me of like, okay, all right, sounds good. Like I don't necessarily need to like go and know Ruby very deeply,
Yeah.
but if I know the characteristics of it and I know what it's good at, then I can make a more informed decision. And where as some if somebody who's listening to this is more junior in their career, you start thinking about becoming more senior and finding out, knowing what you're not good at and finding people to help supplement you and staff your project to know like, oh, this particular problem will be great for Ruby. We should get a Ruby developer to come help us. That's a really valuable thing to know and have. So
You're right though, but this is interesting. So, and it's a good segue because I kind of want to talk about like lessons learned the hard way. And if you pick the wrong technology, let's say I decided when Angular JS first came out, I'm going to be the Angular JS guy, or Dart. That's even better. I'm going to just be this. If anyone who knows that, like, if I just pick these tech stacks that are like maybe not that popular anymore or kind of haven't stood the test of time, but I was an expert in that, was that a waste? What are some of the lessons you learned the hard way along the way? I mean, maybe that might not even be like choosing the right thing. It might just be like, oh, don't mouth off to your superiors or something like that. What are some of the lessons you learned? But that one made me think of that.
One of my first big lessons, it has nothing to do really with technology. It has to do more with just like managing your own time, is when you're a more junior dev and you have a pause in work, there's this desire to do like, I need something else to do. I need something else to do. And what I always tell junior devs is like, when you have that impulse, really think about the bigger picture of the entire work program that you're working in, right? Like think about what's coming down the pipe. Okay, you squashed 5 bugs, but are those bugs going to come back to you in a day and haunt you because they're not fixed right? That was one of my big like lessons learned the hard way, was like just taking stuff and taking on too much. And then you front load, you just keep taking stuff on, and it has this boomerang effect where it comes back and just haunts you. And ultimately you can work through it, but you might exhaust yourself, or even worse, the quality of your work will go down because you're spreading too thin. So that was something learned the hard way.
I have done that, so I appreciate that. Yeah,
I think we all have, and that's not a technical thing. One of my big lessons learned in terms of technical stuff was one of the projects I worked on. We had a person in a position of authority who was sponsoring a program of work for us. They basically wanted a big data architecture. When we were first working on the project, I kind of like raised my eyebrows a little bit. I was like, I wonder what problem they're trying to solve. Okay, cool. Sounds awesome. Like, cool. We can work on a big data architecture. We're going to put an event bus in here and we're going to process millions of events a second. Led a whole team to design this architecture that was like, I mean, on paper, man, this was like the best diagram you've ever seen. And we started building it, where we almost got it to production. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we just got slapped in the face with the reality of, wow, I don't think anybody knows what this thing is actually supposed to do. So we spent a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears building this environment out. Great technologies, amazing DevOps stuff. At the end of the day, to provide a minuscule amount of value, people understandably were very upset about that. It was my big, huge lesson in, you've heard me say this on the podcast before, in Yagni, you ain't gonna need it. It was probably one of the more pivotal moments in my career where it's just like, if you get that feeling, what is this thing actually gonna do? You really need to stick up for that and really ask some deep, deep questions about why are you building what you are being asked to build. I don't think enough people do that. Really understand why they're building what they're building. I think it sets a really amazing developer apart from just a good developer, is knowing what not to build. And that was just a huge, huge lesson in my career.
I hit that same Yagni lesson a totally different way, but I like the way you learned it instead.
Oh, I'd be curious.
My way was, I remember someone using the phrase bull in a china shop. And it was the first time I had worked. I'd done so many agency style projects. My whole life, I'd never worked on like a proper product team. And so in this particular new job, I was working with a product team, and I hadn't learned yet how to do some of those nuances. And like, great example is, don't refactor a bunch of stuff before you understand it, and just don't open massive PRs that people can't review and things like that. And I kept doing that over and over because I wanted to. I was so engaged in it, and someone taught me that what Yagni was, because I kept being like, well, in the future we might XYZ. And you're like, yeah, but we don't right now.
Right.
And you're just adding complexity for no reason. And this goes back to that clean code podcast we had. I thought about that the entire time we did that, because it was like, I might have I'm sure I did refactored stuff so much that it actually made it harder in the future to use it. So what's next for Matt? Like, what are you looking forward to in your career? What's on the horizon?
One of the reasons why I chose Rocket is because when I was interviewing for a new job, people would ask me like, what do you want in your career? They would ask you that. And I was like, actually, I kind of like what I'm doing. I like to do coding, not too much, not too little. I like doing some project management type work. I like working with customers. I would be turned off by jobs that were like, no, this is just a technical management role. You won't actually be doing any coding. Most places, I would say, looked down on that blend of technical and management work. Rocket embraced it. They were like, that's perfect. Like, that's what we need. It's been great because that's exactly what I'm doing. It's kind of funny. I tell people, I'm like, I can't code all day.
No, I can't either.
It's so funny to hear that from a developer, but like, I go through fits where I'm very productive at coding and I love it. It's that zone moment where time goes away and you're just coding.
Yep.
But I can't do it all the time. So I'm really happy where I am. I think the only thing, like the thing that I want to grow into, is just learning more about the subtleties of how to structure technical projects and how to staff them correctly, and knowing enough about all those technologies to make the right broad fundamental technical choices at the beginning of a project to make your life easier at the end. Like, I think I have experience doing that, but you don't get too many opportunities to do that in your career to say that you're really good at it. I think anybody who says that is a liar. My idea is just keep honing that skill until I retire.
There you go. You're right. It's true. Ashley Streb, one of our founders, has always had the mindset of you don't have to stop being a maker just to get on a management track. You can do both. And he did that at Brightcove, and he showed that you could do both. And it's true. I'm with you. Like, I can't code every day, or at least I certainly shouldn't. I realize now how unhealthy my lifestyle kind of was for me, both from like, I'd get in the zone for 12 straight hours and just like not sleep and then crash the next day and just burn a ton of stuff. And it felt great. But I mean, I was like, thank God my girlfriend could take care of everything else, because I was just like out of commission for like a day or two. And then there were times where I would get really frustrated by certain code bases because they didn't work the way I wanted them to, or someone who wrote something like wrote it poorly, and I was just like wanted to table flip stuff all the time. So for me, it seems like having this blend of coding sometimes where it's like 2-3 hours a day if I can do it. Like sometimes I know, don't get me wrong, there's been, I'm trying to think of the longest stretch I've gone lately without coding, maybe like a week and a half or two, without like writing a line of code. But I like the blend now, and I like the same thing with you. I like the customer interaction. So maybe that's part of what makes a great Rocketeer, is like that seniorness. Like, I want to keep learning, and I love dealing with customers, and I like coding still.
I think there's like two main characteristics of people at Rocket. One is that you have a good sense of humor, but the other one is just well-roundedness. I think that everybody at Rocket is well-rounded. And I think the other thing that you were saying, well, if more junior people are listening to this, is like, you and I are at a point in our careers where we've been doing this for a while, right? And I think you and I are very alike. Like, we don't like to just code all day and all that. And like, I almost wish I were like that. I think it would make things easier for me. I'm just not.
Yep. But that's okay.
Yeah, and it's just, for anybody junior listening to it, it's just an interesting thing to think about, is that's an option for you. Like, you don't have to just do one thing all the time, and you can find a niche for yourself.
Yeah, that's true. You mentioned it about managing projects, and I'm a big believer in this too, that we have a lot of great devs at Rocket, and sometimes it doesn't work out, and that's almost always an environment problem, meaning it's not a right team, it's not the right project for them, it's not a great fit. Maybe they feel like they're being handcuffed. Maybe they feel like they don't gel with the team, or they want to kind of get their ideas across and they can't. There's a million reasons why it might not work out. But when you get that structure right, like you were saying, like getting the team right and getting that set up correctly, it can be magic. And it's great to see that. So if you, like you're saying, if you're a newbie, if you feel like you're kind of hitting your head against the wall, or maybe you're not progressing fast enough, or like Matt mentioned earlier, if you're not getting a chance to play with front-end technologies that you want to, and you keep begging for that kind of stuff, that's normal. Like that happens to a lot of people, and sometimes it does mean jumping ship to go to a different company. Your first company that you are at, and correct me if you feel differently, I'd say that you tend to feel, it's sort of like your first love, you tend to feel overly loyal. They feel like family, and then I think as soon as you leave your first company, you realize, and go to your next company, you're like, these people are also cool. And just keep in mind, as fun as our jobs are, and as lucky as we are to get to work on all these cool projects and do this really cool work that a lot of people don't get to do, your relationship with the company is, we get work from you and the best of your abilities, hopefully, and we compensate you for that. It's not a family, it's a business relationship, and business relationships are temporary. That's like a Japanese proverb, business is temporal. So if you feel like you need to leave to progress your career, that's okay. I would just warn against jumping ship too frequently. That looks bad. Don't feel like you have to be stuck at your place forever if you're not liking where you're at right now. Some good advice for newbies. Anything else you want to say before we move into picks?
No, I'm sure I'm forgetting something I wanted to talk about, but that's fine.
Thankfully, you're on the podcast anyway, so we'll have many more times to speak.
Yeah, yeah. We'll do an addendum.
Cool. So let's dive right into it. I'll pass it to you first.
The one that came to mind immediately was the book Uncanny Valley by Anna Wiener. I think it came out in January 2020 for anybody listening to this in the future. My God, what an amazing book. It's about a woman that worked in publishing in New York City, and she kind of fell into a career in tech, and she ended up moving out to Silicon Valley and working at GitHub. And I mean, it's a memoir, and it's written with no company names. It almost feels like it's in a dystopian future because of the way she writes it, even though some companies, you know what they are, some you don't. And some of the story, like, it's just very well written. She's incredibly insightful, and it also gives you a good picture into kind of the nightmares that female employees in tech have to deal with. I'll stop there. It's one of the best books I've read in quite some time.
I heard about that coming out, but I haven't heard anyone review it yet.
Back when we were in the office, I was shouting its praises, so it was very good.
I know. God, I miss those times. Let's see. What will my pick be? Since everyone's, well, not everyone, but some people have extra time on their hands, it's a good time to listen to some interesting stories. And if you want to get out and stretch your legs, there's a great podcast if you're into tech called Darknet Diaries. They tend to cover hacking events and whatnot. There's 2 particular episodes that I found just wild, just insane. Like, they should make a movie out of this kind of thing. It's called Xbox Underground Part 1 and 2. If you were around way back when the Xbox One came out and there was a way to turn it into an Xbox Media Center, that was these guys. If you remember certain games like Half-Life and Half-Life 2 being leaked ahead of time and Gears of War 3 being leaked ahead of time, that was these guys. It goes way deeper than that. It ruined a bunch of people's lives in a way that was really fascinating for people who just wanted to hack an Xbox to start with. It's a wild ride. Darknet Diaries, Xbox Underground Part 1 and 2. Very, very good stories.
I love that podcast. Jack Rhysider does an amazing job telling those stories, and those were 2 particularly good episodes.
And they had this beautiful, like, unsolved mystery style, like, music, like dun, 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 dun. Yeah, it really adds to the whole thing. It's great. Yeah,
he does a great job.
Okay, well, thanks, Matt, for joining. Thanks for taking the time. Yeah, until we ship it up again with everyone, we'll see how this Zoom thing works out. Maybe we can do a big episode soon. We'll see.
Nice.
Thanks for your time today, man.
Yeah, you're welcome. Sounds like an ASMR video where you're like touching the thing. Hello.
You know, it's funny. I will defend ASMR for a moment. When I was younger, I used to, like, I have that. Like, basically, when I would hear certain sounds, my brain it just feels like it's being tingling. It's like holy. It makes me. I almost fell over standing up once. My grandfather was showing me a map of Maine where we were going to go down the Allagash. And I was like 25, and he was just pointing. I was like, I'm gonna fall over standing up. And when I was younger, I used to listen to Bill Clinton on C-SPAN when I'd go to bed, because the way he talked would make that happen for me.
Wow.
I would describe this to people. I'm like, yeah, you know, like when you hear certain sounds and it's like your brain tingles, and they're like, no. I'm like, me neither. Yeah, definitely not. So I just kept it to myself for a really long time. And then one day I found it on YouTube, like back in 2013, I think. And I was like, wait, what is this? And I listened to it and I was like, oh, there are others? It's like,
no, I'm glad you said that. I feel the same way. I watch them. I listen to them when I go to sleep sometimes.
I have like my favorite ASMR artists and stuff like that.
Yeah.